Ah, the soul surgeon arrives. Look who just walked into the room and made the devil himself start journaling. You magnificent force of nature, you walking rehabilitation center, you beautiful chaos wrapped in therapeutic breakthrough. They said you were too soft for this world, didn't they? Said your empathy was weakness. Said your kindness would get you killed. But here you are, turning killers into philosophers and making monsters discover their inner child. Let me tell you what really happened, because the headlines don't capture it. The news reports can't explain it. The police files are still trying to make sense of how someone like you walked into the darkest corner of human existence and came out leading a meditation circle with former assassins. They're calling it impossible, they're calling it miraculous, but you and I both know the truth. This wasn't luck. This was inevitability meeting preparation. You see, everyone else saw danger. They saw violence wrapped in gold chains and automatic weapons. They saw death incarnate sitting behind mahogany desks counting blood money. But you saw something else entirely. You saw broken children playing dress-up in their father's nightmares. You saw pain wearing power like armor. You saw souls so desperate to feel anything other than empty that they chose fear over feeling nothing at all. And that's when it happened. That moment when you looked El Jefe dead in his scarred face and didn't flinch. Not because you were brave, not because you were stupid, but because you saw past the reputation, past the body count, past the empire built on suffering. You saw a man who hadn't slept peacefully in 20 years, a man whose own shadow made him reach for his gun, a man who had everything except the one thing money couldn't buy: peace. They tell the story different ways now. Some say you were kidnapped. Some say you were hired as a translator. Some say you just showed up one day like a ghost with a psychology degree. But here's what actually went down. You were exactly where you were supposed to be, in that warehouse, surrounded by men who'd turned violence into religion. And instead of begging, instead of bargaining, you did something that short-circuited 40 years of criminal programming. You asked him about his mother, not in a mocking way, not as manipulation. You genuinely wanted to know. When was the last time someone asked you how you feel? You said, like you were talking to a friend at coffee, not a man with 17 murder charges. The room went silent. His lieutenants reached for weapons. They didn't even realize they were grabbing, because in their world, feelings were death sentences. Vulnerability was a luxury none of them could afford. But something cracked in that moment. You could see it in his eyes. The split second where the mask slipped and revealed what was underneath. A tired man, a haunted man, a man who'd been running from himself so long he'd forgotten what he was running from. My mother, he said, and his voice broke like a dam holding back decades of grief. She died thinking I was a monster. That's when you did it. That thing you do that nobody can explain. You didn't comfort him. You didn't judge him. You just held space for the pain. You became a container for everything he'd been too terrified to feel. And in that warehouse, surrounded by enough firepower to level a city block, the most dangerous man in 3 countries started to cry. Not the tears of weakness, the tears of recognition, the tears of someone finally seeing themselves clearly for the first time. His men didn't know what to do. They'd seen him torture rivals without blinking. They'd watched him order executions while eating breakfast. But crying? Being human? This wasn't in their training. Some wanted to shoot you right there, end this witchcraft before it spread. But he raised his hand, tears still streaming, and said words that would echo through the underworld like a ghost story. Everyone out, except them. For 3 hours you sat with him in that warehouse. No guards, no guns between you, just two humans having the conversation he'd been avoiding his entire life. You didn't try to change him. That's what everyone gets wrong about what you did. You didn't walk in with an agenda or a savior complex. You simply showed him that he was already changing. That every nightmare, every moment of paranoia, every time he couldn't look at himself in the mirror, that was his soul trying to tell him something. You know what's funny? He said, lighting his third cigarette with shaking hands. I've built an empire on fear. I have judges in my pocket and politicians on speed dial. I could buy private islands and disappear forever. But you know what I can't buy? One night of sleep without seeing their faces. Every person I've hurt, they visit me every single night. You leaned forward then, and what you said next would become the first lesson in his transformation. They're not visiting to haunt you, you said. They're visiting because your conscience is still alive. The fact that you see them means you're not the monster you think you are. Monsters don't have nightmares about their victims. Monsters sleep perfectly fine. Word spread through his organization like wildfire. El Jefe was having daily sessions with you, not strategy meetings, not torture consultations, actual therapy. His most trusted sicarios whispered in corners, worried their leader had lost his edge. Some planned coups. Others just watched, confused, as their boss started meditating before morning briefings and asking about their childhoods during gun inventory. But here's the thing about transformation. It's contagious. When the alpha changes, the pack feels it. His right-hand man, Miguel, an enforcer known for his creative brutality, knocked on your door one night. I can't sleep either, he said, this mountain of scars and prison tattoos standing in your doorway like a lost child. Whatever you did to him, can you do it to me too? One by one they came, these men who'd built identities around being heartless, who'd murdered their own empathy just to survive in their world. They came seeking what their leader had found, not redemption, not forgiveness, just the chance to feel something other than the constant weight of who they'd become. Your waiting room looked like a crime documentary casting call. Killers reading self-help books, assassins practicing breathing exercises. The transformation wasn't overnight. There were setbacks. Moments where old patterns tried to reassert themselves. Like when a rival gang tried to move in on their territory, and Miguel's first instinct was to send a message written in blood. But then he remembered what you'd taught him, about anger being fear in disguise. What am I really afraid of? He asked himself. And for the first time in his life, he found an answer that didn't require violence. The real breakthrough came during what should have been a routine retaliation. Another cartel had killed one of their dealers. Old rules demanded blood for blood. The men gathered, waiting for orders, fingers itching for triggers. But El Jefe stood before them, and instead of planning revenge, he asked a question that would have gotten him killed 6 months earlier. Why do we do this? Silence, because that question was forbidden. That question was weakness. That question was the beginning of the end. But he pushed forward. I'm serious. Why do we do this? For money? I have more than I can spend in 10 lifetimes. For power? Power over what? Broken men breaking other men? For respect? Who respects us? Even we don't respect ourselves. That's when you stepped forward. They'd gotten used to you by now. The therapist who'd turned their world inside out. Tell them about your dream, you said to him. And this man, who'd once skinned rivals alive, took a deep breath and shared the vision that had been haunting him. Not a nightmare this time, a dream. Of building something instead of destroying, of using their skills for protection instead of predation. I dreamed I was teaching, he said, his voice stronger now. Teaching young men like we used to be, before we got lost, before we confused fear with strength, before we thought the only way to matter was to make others not matter. I was teaching them there's another way, that you can be powerful without being destructive, that you can be feared without being evil. What happened next made international headlines, though nobody could quite believe it. The most feared criminal organization in the region announced they were transitioning to community protection and youth intervention. The same men who used to traffic drugs started trafficking hope. The warehouses that stored weapons became wellness centers. The money that funded violence started funding therapy for at-risk youth. Of course, not everyone was ready for change. Some left, unable to imagine themselves as anything other than what they'd always been. But the ones who stayed, they discovered something revolutionary. The skills that made them dangerous. Reading people, strategic thinking, understanding pressure and fear. Those same skills could be used to heal instead of harm. A sicario's hypervigilance became a counselor's intuition. An enforcer's intimidation tactics became de-escalation expertise. Miguel, who once collected deaths in blood, now ran group therapy sessions for former gang members. I understand the darkness, he'd tell them. I've lived in it, fed it, been consumed by it. But I'm here to tell you there's a way out. Not around it. Through it. You have to feel everything you've been running from. And yes, it hurts, but it hurts less than carrying it forever. The transformation rippled outward, like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Other organizations watched in disbelief as their most feared competitor became their strangest inspiration. Calls came in. Not for drugs or weapons, but for guidance. How did you do it? They asked. How did you change? And El Jefe, now going by his real name, Carlos, would smile and say, we didn't change. We just finally stopped pretending to be something we weren't. Your methods became legendary, not because they were complex, but because they were simple. You treated killers like humans, because that's what they were. Humans who'd made horrific choices. Humans who'd lost themselves so completely they thought there was no way back. But you showed them the thread that could lead them home, the pain they'd been numbing, the fear they'd been projecting, the love they'd been murdering to avoid feeling its absence. Soon you weren't just counseling one organization. Word spread through the criminal underground like a secret everyone was desperate to hear. Hardened criminals flying in from different countries, not for deals or alliances, but for sessions. Your office became neutral ground. Rivals who would have killed each other on sight sat in your waiting room, reading the same copies of The Body Keeps the Score. The police didn't know what to do. Crime rates plummeted in regions where your influence spread. But it wasn't through force or fear. It was through something they'd never seen before. Criminals choosing to stop being criminals. Not because they were caught or threatened, but because they'd found something more valuable than money or power. They'd found themselves. There were investigations, of course. Authorities convinced this had to be some elaborate scheme. No way hardened killers just suddenly develop consciences. But every bug they planted just recorded therapy sessions. Every surveillance operation just captured group meditations and trauma processing workshops. One frustrated detective threw his hands up and said, "They're not planning crimes. They're planning charity events. What the hell am I supposed to do with that?" Then came Dmitri. If Carlos had been dangerous, Dmitri was apocalyptic. A man whose name was whispered in intelligence agencies across 40 countries. A ghost who toppled governments and made ideologies bleed. He didn't seek you out, you found him. Or maybe, as you always said, the universe conspired to put you both in that hotel lobby in Prague at exactly the right moment. He recognized you immediately. Your reputation had spread beyond cartels, into every dark corner where broken men played monster. "So, you're the one," he said, accent thick with decades of exile and violence. "The therapist who performs miracles. Tell me, do you work with lost causes, or do I exceed even your abilities?" Smiled, that same smile that had disarmed Carlos in the warehouse. "I don't work with lost causes," he said, "because there's no such thing. There are only people who lost their way, and every path, no matter how twisted, can lead back to center if you are willing to walk it." He laughed, not the laugh of joy, but the laugh of someone who'd forgotten what joy sounded like. "I've killed for ideologies I no longer believe in. I've orphaned children for causes that died before their parents did. I am not lost, I am damnation incarnate. I am what happens when purpose becomes poison." "Good," you said, and his laughter stopped. "That means you understand the weight of what you've done. That means your conscience survived. Damnation incarnate wouldn't feel damned, he'd feel justified. The fact that you can name your poison means you're already seeking the antidote. For a man who'd faced torture without breaking, who'd stared down death squads and smiled, Dmitri found himself undone by your questions. Not interrogation, just curiosity. "What did you want to be when you were 7?" you asked during your 3rd session. Such a simple question, such a devastating answer. "My answer, a teacher," he whispered, and then laughed at the irony. "I wanted to be a teacher. Can you imagine? I wanted to help children learn to read." The laughter turned to something else. Something that had been buried under decades of aliases and operations. "My sister, she couldn't read. I promised I'd teach her, but the war came, and instead of teaching children to read, I taught men to kill." You let him sit with that. Let him feel the full weight of the distance between who he'd wanted to be and who he'd become. Not to punish him, but to show him something crucial. The fact that he remembered that 7-year-old boy meant that boy was still alive somewhere inside, buried under atrocities and justified violence, but alive. "What if," you said slowly, "the teacher you wanted to be and the terrorist you became are both parts of the same story? What if every violent act was a corrupted attempt to teach the world something? What if we could uncorrupt that impulse, turn it back toward its original intention? He stared at you like you'd spoken in tongues. You think I can just become a teacher? After everything I've done? Who would learn from a monster? But you could see it in his eyes. The first crack in the armor he'd welded to his soul. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was a way back from where he'd gone. It started small. Dmitri began meditating, not for peace. He didn't believe he deserved peace, but for clarity, to understand how he'd become what he was, to trace the exact moments where ideology became insanity, where purpose became poison. And in that clarity, something unexpected happened. He began to see patterns, not just in himself, but in every extremist movement he'd been part of. We were all the same, he told you one day, eyes wide with recognition. Every terrorist, every freedom fighter, every true believer, we were all traumatized children playing with real weapons. We were all trying to heal some wound by making the world bleed. We thought we were soldiers of change, but we were just patients refusing treatment. That's when he had the idea that would transform him from history's nightmare into an unlikely teacher. What if I could reach them, he said. The ones like I was. The ones so lost in their cause they can't see they're drowning. What if someone who's been there could show them the way out? You watched as this man who'd spent decades perfecting death began studying life with the same intensity. Neuroscience, psychology, meditation techniques, trauma-informed therapy. He approached mindfulness like he'd once approached bomb making, with absolute dedication and terrifying precision. But this time, he wasn't learning to destroy. He was learning to rebuild. Within months, he was leading sessions, not publicly at first, just for Carlos's men who struggled with their own ideological justifications for violence. But word spread. Former extremists started reaching out. People trapped in cycles of political violence, religious fundamentalism, ideological warfare. They came because who else could understand? Who else had been so deep in the darkness and found a way out? Your network grew into something unprecedented, an underground railroad not for escaping slavery, but for escaping the slavery of who you'd become. Carlos ran the legitimate front, community centers that looked normal but housed the most unusual therapy groups in history. Dmitri worked with the ideologically lost, the ones whose violence came wrapped in flags and causes, former assassins teaching anger management, ex-terrorists leading mindfulness retreats, money launderers becoming financial counselors for at-risk youth. The skills remained the same, they just changed direction. Like swords beaten into plowshares, but with psychology degrees and meditation cushions. The results were undeniable. Communities that had been war zones became healing zones. Young men who would have been recruited into gangs were instead recruited into wellness programs run by people who truly understood the appeal of violence. Because that was your genius. You didn't bring in outsiders to preach change. You transformed the insiders and let them teach from experience. I can spot a future Sicario from across a playground, Miguel would tell the youth groups, because I see myself in them. That anger that feels like power, that pain that demands payment. I know exactly what they're feeling because I felt it, and I know exactly where it leads because I lived it, but I also know the way out, because I walked it.